Now we have the honor of having General Keith Ellison with us, and it's my great honor to introduce General Ellison. He's my friend, my close ally, and often my inspiration. Over the years, I've had the privilege of getting to know many leaders in Congress and in legislatures and enforcement positions all across America. And as is my wont, I usually try to bring the conversation swiftly around to the issue of monopoly. The only leader who understood this issue immediately, once we started talking, who got it completely in all of its depth, breadth, and terrifying detail, was Senator Elizabeth Warren. But that was only until I met General Keith Ellison a few months later. Not only was General Ellison able to complete every sentence that I started, he immediately translated it into a language that would explain the problem in a way that everybody could understand. Simple, human, personal terms. General Ellison is someone who has been a hero from the first. He's dedicated his life to public service ever since high school. He started his career as a criminal defense and civil rights attorney for 16 years. He then served 4 years in the Minnesota House of Representatives and 12 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he also served as the leader of the Progressive Caucus. And it was only then that things got interesting, because that's when General Ellison decided to leave Congress voluntarily and return to Minnesota to serve the people of this state as their number one defender of the people's interest. As Attorney General, General Ellison has fought to lower pharmaceutical prices, hold opioid makers accountable for the deadly epidemic that they have created, protect tenants from exploitation, protect student borrowers, hold big corporations accountable for consumer fraud and deception, and to eliminate wage theft and pandemic profiteering and unfair evictions. General Ellison did all of this while serving as a leader for criminal justice reform and leading the prosecution in the death of George Floyd here in Minneapolis. And then there's the reason we are here today, which is General Ellison's fight to protect the people of Minnesota against concentrated economic power and unfair competition. General Ellison has fought to protect Minnesota's farmers and small businesses and Minnesota's healthcare workers, and indeed every Minnesotan against bullying, cheating, theft, and really any and every devilish behavior by the people who control big corporations. And he's done so in a way that has set a standard for the rest of the nation. So please join me in welcoming General Ellison.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Barry. And it's wonderful to have all of you and have you here in Minnesota. It is an interesting conversation that we're having at a very important time, because I can tell you that when I entered the United States Congress, there weren't too many people talking about antitrust other than Elizabeth Warren. But you were, and Lena Khan was, and you all were making this issue the issue. I heard about the work that you were doing, and we came together and we started a congressional antitrust caucus, and you spoke at some of the first meetings that we had. And we had a series of conversations that included agricultural concentration, how monopoly affects black and brown communities, which is a very important part of this conversation. If you think that small businesses get pushed out by the big dogs as they consolidate, think about minority-owned firms. You can barely buy hairspray made by a black manufacturer now. This is affecting the entire economy and impacting everyone. And it is your effort, I believe, that has helped driven this issue to be what I believe is the number one issue. And when people ask about what's the main issue, they might not say antitrust, but but what they're gonna say probably has something to do with antitrust. If they said Inflation. I'm worried about inflation. Well, they probably are being impacted by a bunch of CEOs on earnings calls boasting about how they're tacking on a little premium to their profit margin, right? If you want to talk about climate, well, why can't we get more progress on climate? Because of highly concentrated markets. And I can tell you, our lawsuit against ExxonMobil, they bite back. They actually had somebody introduce a bill to limit my office from bringing on fellows paid for by a foundation, right? And I got a feeling that they're up to some other stuff too. My point is that you, Barry, and others have made this issue of antitrust the key issue. I was at a meeting just the other day where I posed a question. I said, if I could tell you that by working on one issue, we can stop wage stagnation, increase small business development, increase product differentiation, preserve the family farm, and lower consumer prices, would you want to work on that one issue? And I was like, yeah, what is that? Well, that's antitrust. And so many of the things that impact people, when I'm knocking on doors, I'm an elected politician, I have to knock on doors and go get votes. People, in one way or another, are talking about this issue, and it is high time that we paid special attention to it. Let me tell you, in my office, I got some folks who I want you to meet. Could you guys stand up? Is it Elizabeth Lee? Oh yeah, Elizabeth Odette, who's leading the band, Katie Morkey leading the band, and then Zach Seitz over there leading the band, got him from New York, very much, you guys can have a seat. And then Keon Delsty, who is a law student, but who works in our outreach group, and he's doing a great job too. And we feel that I'm telling you that as long as I'm AG, we're gonna be trying to dedicate more resources to this group so that we can do more to help make sure that this economy is one where anybody can aspire to prosperity. That's what it's all about. I mean, what I tell folks is that we are in business to help people afford their lives. Is that what I say? I mean, my staff was like, yeah, that's what you say. 'Cause I say it all the time. But we can't afford our lives if some giant international amalgamation is soaking up all the resources and all the democracy and all the this and all the that at the expense of the average person. And so this movement, what I'm really talking about, Barry, is your leadership in a movement and all of our role in that movement. There has been a fairly large number of books written. Many of you probably read them. Hope you read them. But I was inspired by Barry's book, Move Fast and Break Things. That was one of the first books on high-tech concentration. Professor Teachout wrote a great book called Break 'em Up. Amy Klobuchar wrote a great book on a monopoly and antitrust. And and I hope that we keep on generating articles and books and academic research, because this is all going to help drive that movement. But I also am very excited about meetings like this one, because we've got to break this conversation out of academia and out of the halls of Congress and get it into the community. And one of the folks that are really doing a great job at that is the Farmers Union in the state of Minnesota. The National Farmers Union has a campaign called Fairness for Farmers. And Stu Laurie is here. Stand up, Stu. The guy in the big beard over there. And they have a raffle going on where they're trying to raffle off a side-by-side, which is, for those of you who don't know, an agricultural vehicle that is multi-terrain in its ability to navigate ground. And on the side of it is plastered Trust Buster. Right, and so if you buy a ticket, you might get the Trust Buster. But the Farmers Union has also helped to sponsor an intern in my office who works on antitrust, because they're farmers, so they're trying to grow talent, right? And did y'all get that one? Okay, so we're real pleased to be working with them. But they are I believe, the vanguard of the popular movement to help people understand how market concentration is not good for all of us. And let me just say, you know, market concentration hurts and harms real people and their lives. You know, just in the area of agriculture, again, sticking with that theme, a few months ago, a farmer in Rice County, Minnesota, explained that they only have 2 buyers when they are putting their livestock up for auction. That's too concentrated. Those buyers are in a position to just dictate terms. These farmers are very anxious and worried that they will show up and maybe only have 1 buyer or no buyers, and we'll have to accept any price that is offered. The limited choice of who to sell to and the price at which to sell causes their earnings to plummet. And there in Minnesota, just to skip over to dairy for a moment, we've literally lost hundreds of dairy farms in Minnesota over the last few years. I'll never forget Sonny Perdue was over there in Wisconsin and said, you know, when it comes to dairy farms, you got to get big or get out, which I believe is the absolute opposite of what the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act and all the other laws require. It's not get big and get out. It's if you're too big, you can't exist. You know, do y'all remember too big to fail? How'd that work out for us? Not very good. But then we can move over to healthcare. You know, there was a recent study that found over 75% of hospital markets are highly concentrated, meaning that one or only a few hospital systems dominate an entire local market. And right now, they're trying to concentrate again right here in our local community. And we have some thoughts about that we will be dealing with. And then not just the hospitals, also pharmaceuticals. I mean, we actually have been pushing litigation in the area of insulin. And I tell you, one thing that got me interested in this is when before I was even in Congress, I was at a community meeting, not too different from this one, and a lady walks up to me and says, "I got to talk to you." And when that happens and you're a politician, you know that you better focus your attention on that person, right? And she said to me, her name was Nicole Smith Holt, and she said to me, my son turned 26, which most mothers would be happy about that. But when he turned 26, he aged off the Affordable Care Act. So his insulin price went from a few bucks to about $1,300 a month. And as a result of that, he couldn't pay it, and he was too proud to ask me for it. So he started rationing his insulin. He's a type 1 diabetic, and his body went into ketoacidosis, and we lost him. And she said, "I want to know what you're going to do about it." And I talked to her, and I listened to her, and I shared with her what I wanted to do about it. But the only good answer I could come up with that satisfied me is to put myself in a position to try to enforce antitrust laws, because that is at the bottom of this outrageous pricing that we have in the area of insulin. I mean, here's the reality. I mean, when they discovered insulin some 100 years ago, the inventors or the discoverers sold it to University of Toronto for $1. It doesn't supposed to be out of the reach. Her son, Alex, he did not die from diabetes. He died because he couldn't afford insulin. He died because he couldn't afford his life. And that is what we are fighting to stop and to change. Let's talk about wages for a minute. One study found that the median compensation for American workers would be $10,000 higher if employers were less concentrated. Wow. Talk about housing crisis, food crisis, clothing crisis, people not being able to make it, can't afford health care. Come on, man. It's just taking from, and just putting yourself in a position to take from people. Another study found that a corporate consolidation costs American households $5,000 a year in purchasing power. There's a consensus around the studies, and this is something that I think wage-earning people want to know, but they don't know, and that's part of our job is to make sure they learn. And let me also move on to the subject of democracy, an important, critical topic. In fact, the defining feature of our country, you might say. And democracy cannot exist where monopolies thrive. In fact, fighting monopolies means fighting for our democracy. As Louis Brandeis famously said, and I know you all know the quote, but I'm going to say it anyway. We may have democracy, or we may have wealth concentrated in a few hands, but we can't have both. If we have anything today, we have wealth concentrated in a few hands. And there shouldn't be any surprise to any of us that some people, feel that the days of representative democracy in America have come to an end. In fact, they fought to try to stop the peaceful transfer of power. I am telling you, these political divisions, these polarization, much of it can be found in these highly concentrated markets and how these problems manifest politically. I can assure you that if you are a member of Congress, nobody is going to try to bribe you. They don't have to. All they have to say is, "Oh, Congressman, have we ever done an event for you?" And you know what they mean. They're going to get their friends together and throw you some PAC checks, and that's going to help you get reelected. And if you start squawking in the wrong direction, they just ignore you. I mean, the great Paul Wellstone famously said this about one monopolistic industry. He said, when it comes to big tobacco, I don't take any money from big tobacco. I don't take any money from big tobacco. Of course, they don't offer me any either. So that's the way Congress works. If you don't sing their song, they can ignore you because there's plenty others who will. Very important to keep that in mind. And, so I just do on this issue of what do we do, we need to operate on multiple levels. We need to have a grassroots community engagement. Ms. McGillicuddy must understand what concentrated markets mean to her. And we've got to think about how to build that. We've also got to work legislatively, and we've got some good progress going on that. I'll talk about that in a minute. We've got to work in litigation. We've got to sue some folks. And we've got to change the way lawsuits are constructed. It's too expensive. Quite honestly, whenever we're going to take on a big case, and my staff knows this is true, we're going to get ready for the sticker shock in the area of cost shares. So like, oh, you want to sue this big dog, that big dog? Drop 50 grand on the table to get started because that's our share of the litigation and the experts. That makes it very difficult to hold them accountable. We need to change the law to make it easier and put the burden on them. So we need grassroots action, we need litigation, we need legislation, we need administrative changes, we need academic thought and development on what we do, how we deal with the modern realities and how the modern realities are related to the old realities. We need all these things. And if we do these things and we stick to it and don't get pushed aside, we're going to have a better economy. We're going to have a better world. We have a more democratic world. We're going to have a cleaner, greener world. We're going to have a world that's more just and more equitable. But let me just talk about some of the possible legislative solutions. There are limitations. I want to talk a little bit about federal bills. There are some strong bills proposed in Congress. I'm sure you probably have already talked about them today, but none have yet to make it over the finish line yet. It's going to need to take all of our effort to get them there. On the state enforcement, one of them is the State Enforcement Venue Act. Now, this is very important. It gives state AG offices the ability to control the venue that they bring their antitrust cases in. But actually, these days, if anybody gave me a choice between state court and federal court, that's a no-brainer. Where do we go, Elizabeth? State court. We don't want to be dragged over there. But it would be nice if we would have that choice. The Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission already have this ability under federal law, and states are looking for the same protection. Minnesota laws, right now, we're working on and have worked with legislators who are eager to work with us on this, about cleaning up and updating our state antitrust laws, bringing them into conformity with the federal Robinson-Pacman Act, and passing abuse of dominance additions to our legislative package. We're also interested in this issue of right to repair. We've heard from Minnesotans that if the device I own is broken, shouldn't I get to decide how my device is repaired? Seems like a simple request, wouldn't you say, Stu? But you start messing around with that tractor, you're gonna lose your warranty and get into a whole bunch of other problems. I mean, the bottom line is not just agriculture. It's phones, it's all kinds of things. And I remember when I was a kid, there were repair shops. When's the last time you saw a repair shop? Well, this is because of this kind of development. And so developments in the area of right to repair. There was a complaint filed with the FTC against John Deere in March. It alleges unfair methods of competition, such as agreements of restraint of trade and monopolization, and unfair deceptive trade practices. In March also, we supported legislation proposed in the Minnesota State Legislature for the second session in a row on digital fair repair. And so we are working on this issue as well. And I mentioned rulemaking. We have been active and we've coalesced with AGs. And I want to say to the folks in this room, I'm not the only AG who cares about this issue. Phil Weiser really cares about this issue. Tom Miller cares about this issue. And there are a number of Republican AGs who have expressed interest in this issue, from PBMs to a number of things. So this is space for us to work together on something, and I think we should definitely make that effort. I'm speaking from the perspective of a Democrat, but I can assure you that I'll work with anybody who wants to make this economy fair for working people and regular folks. But the rulemaking, we've offered comments and helped to develop better rules in the area of the Packers and the Stockyards Act. We've urged the Department of Justice to investigate price fixing in the cattle industry, and we helped work with 16 AGs asking the USDA to improve competition in the meat processing industry. As you all go back to your various states, meet with your AGs. Talk to them about your concerns. And then me and your AG could get together and work on some things together. Many hands makes light work. And I think this is an organizing challenge that we should all take on. So let me just wrap up by just talking about state enforcers and how state enforcers have a particular and important role to play. Minnesota recently joined the Department of Justice and the New York AG. You've seen Tish in the news recently, right? And we're suing to stop the United Health Group, which is located here, by the way, from acquiring Change Healthcare. In this case is about control and use of individual medical and insurance data. Unfortunately, the court issued an order this week denying the challenge and allowing the merger to proceed. That's why we need to think about who's on our federal benches. That we need a new era of antitrust jurisprudence. However, only after litigation was imminent did the parties take certain actions to address certain issues that the government had identified as anti-competitive, and we're going to continue to stick with this case to get every bit of reform that we can. Suboxone just recently survived its summary judgment challenge and is headed to trial alleging anti-competitive product hopping to illegally obtain exclusivity. And there are a number of active public multi-states in various stages of litigation, including generic drugs, Facebook, and 3 different Google cases. Let me just wrap up by saying that this effort, we won't go from where we are now to some nirvana overnight. But if we start now working on all the various fronts that I identified and you identify, I am promising you that in a few short years, this economy will have a new jolt of energy, exhilaration, we'll have a fairer economy, and we will have better politics. But we've got to identify it and we've got to stick to it, and I'm honored to work on it with all of you. Thank you.
Well, that was great. It's a great way to end the day, and I think makes it a lot easier for Stacy and I to get out of here because you said everything that needs to be said. Including you used the word democracy, putting that out there. We only have a couple minutes, and I kind of want to get to the issue that's, foremost in a lot of people's minds. You touched on this, which is, being able to work with Republicans. And, you were the head of the Progressive Caucus, and that put you on one wing of the Democratic Party. Yet you had very good relations with many Republicans, constructive relationships. Is that still possible?
Yes. But I think it's important to start out with the idea that, look, you guys are the ones talking about free enterprise, right? Remind them what they believe, they say their belief system is. And that requires certain things. It requires atomized buyers and sellers. It requires information, free information. It requires, a number of features that we don't have. And I can't tell you how many lectures people want to give about free enterprise in markets that are anything but competitive markets. And yet, so the opportunity is there. There's a lot of folks who are genuine in their belief. I mean, our big problem, part of our problem really is politics and democracy. I mean, I could have given a whole section, I guess I did talk a little bit about this on campaign finance. I believe that Citizens United really was a pro-monopoly decision, It's a pro-monopoly decision. It's like, okay, and so there are some, but I think that there's room to get along. I know that Amy Klobuchar, I've talked to her, and she's got some folks on the other side of the aisle willing to work. But I think you just got to ask them, you got to invite them, and you got to talk it. You got to sound it. And if you do, you'll get somewhere. And I mean, like Tom Miller, Max is from Iowa. He's great at working with Republicans, and on issues of ag, and on issues of particularly in remotely located communities, healthcare, particularly like psychiatry, mental health. They need answers, and if they don't get them, they'll get them. They'll take them from where they can get them. So I think the answer is yes, but it's not going to be easy.
And is this actually, having worked in Washington and then having come back to the state, and is it this kind of bipartisanship, is this something that can be built up from the states up? Because, we've seen some remarkable actions in the last few years come out of the states. Mm-hmm. Unlike, states have had antitrust authority for well more than 100 years. But what we've seen with nearly every state coming together to take on Google in 2 cases and Facebook, that's unprecedented, and that's a bottom-up democracy.
That's right.
So do you see ways for people to rebuild this system, even if Washington is?
Yeah, honestly, one of the good things about Washington is they have a lot of resources, but one of the bad things about Washington is if you start there, it's really hard to start there. You got to start out here, and you start here. And by the time you get to Washington, you get FTC or somebody or a committee, a bipartisan group in Congress, then the issue already has some momentum, right? I think the next frontier in terms of doing bipartisan stuff isn't necessarily in Congress. I think it's at the community meeting. I think we need to really work hard to have community meetings that have people of diverse ideological positions. Because if somebody's child is schizophrenic and they live 2 hours from the nearest, healthcare facility, they're not off into the ideology. They want to get their kids some help, there's one cooking here right now that really does worry me, and I can tell you that people want answers, and they will cross lines to help they will cross lines to save their farm. They will cross lines to help their kids. They will cross lines to get their needs met. Actually, all the bickering we do is like a byproduct of the comfort that we have. We can afford to fight over nonsense in Washington that in parts of our states we just can't.
That's great. Actually, last question, and you can actually you can add a statement to this if you want, but, this is, this can be really depressing, these issues. Seeing, we're talking about the survival of democracy.
Right.
You've mentioned that, you just made the case that a lot of the dysfunction in our democracy is due to monopolization.
Right. I believe that.
We're dealing with people who are being killed by monopolists, who
Yep.
are taking their drugs from them, taking their hospitals and clinics from them. But you wake up every day and you keep fighting.
Yep.
And are we going to have a better tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But patience is not sitting back and hoping for the best. Patience is doing something every day with the hope and the faith that if you keep it up long enough, it's going to work out. And that is where we are. We should take a page from history. You're a historian, and many of y'all in this room are. They were up. The Gilded Age wasn't a walk in the park, right? When you had the oil barons and the railroad barons and the steel barons and this baron and that baron, they were up against a lot, and yet they found a way to push back. And that's what we must do in this moment. And it would bear studying. How did they get a street level consensus that this work needed to be done? And so we need to do it. We need to tell people we're not trying to stop cell phones, or we're trying to make sure that this product is delivered to the public in a fair way. Sometime the monopolist, one monopolist said to me the other day, "Oh, you're suing ExxonMobil. Did you drive here in a car?" I'm like, "Okay, genius. If they hadn't lied about it, we'd be driving in a hovercraft or something." So my point is that confronting the monopolist and the drive toward monopoly doesn't hurt, doesn't take away things that we like. It actually adds more of them. Isn't it somewhat fascinating to know that the world that we see is a pale comparison to the one we could have if we had fairer markets and let the creative juices of it, people just go get out there? Right now, electronic vehicles are the rage. They could have been 30 years ago, right? We could have had all the charging stations that you would ever want 30 years ago. But a monopolist, General Motors, said, "You're going to be addicted to gas, buddy." So that's what they decided. So I think that we've got to help people see the other side of the mountain. That it's actually brighter over there.
Well, I think that's a great point to stop on, with that little glimmer, that little glimpse across the top of this dark mountain to that brighter side. Thank you, General Ellison. It's been really great to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn.